You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. This week's episode is an interview, and sometimes when you do an interview, sound quality isn't quite what you would hope it would be, but this interview is fantastic, and so I hope that you will forgive us and enjoy. Welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and we have a very special episode for you this week. I'm very excited to be able to have our guest on to discuss something that has... Well, it was delayed for quite a while, and it has finally come out. Before we get to that, just want to thank you, everybody, for joining us. And, of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure you're subscribed so you're getting the episodes as soon as they drop. Of course, you can find us all over social media. We're on Twitter at the 602 Club, on Instagram, 602 Club TFM. Of course, you can find us on Letterboxd as well under 602 Club. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And, of course, the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference. And, of course, the website online at trek.fm. But I'm so excited to have with us tonight to talk about his latest book. It has finally come out, even though it was completed quite a while ago. The one and only Paul Duncan. How are you, Paul?
I'm great. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing really well. It's so much fun to be able to talk to you again. We had previously met up to talk about, we had talked about both of your Star Wars Archives books, the original trilogy and the prequel edition. And so we're having you here on the 602 Club to talk about your latest book, which is the James Bond Archives, but special No Time to Die edition. Now, completing the series with 25 Eon films as well as the 2 other films. So, oh my gosh. First, I just got to ask you how you feel now that the book is finally released.
Relieved, but also it's a bit strange because I finished it so long ago.
Yeah.
Because I finished it for the release of the movie, and obviously with the pandemic and everything that's happened around the world, with the delay for films to come out at cinemas, etc. It's almost a surprise now for the book to actually come out. In fact, there's a little factoid here. The book was actually printed, right, ready for release. So what happened was the book was printed, but obviously because it was full of spoilers on the movie, it had to be wrapped and held securely, locked up before the release of the movie, because obviously nobody wanted spoilers to come out before the movie came.
Yeah, that's so crazy to me that happened. Obviously to the publisher, and of course, I was going to be in Dallas, Texas at the time. I had the tickets to go see the movie. We were going to be at a wedding at that point. It was going to be one, there's some really good screens around the country here. And this was one of the best screens. It was going to be the IMAX laser. So it was going to be like the best format you could see this in. And then, of course, it all got canceled, like everybody else, is life, for about a year and a half. So, oh my gosh. Well, I'm excited that it's finally released, and then I've gotten a chance to read it, and now that we can finally talk about it. And so,
tell me, what do you think of the book then, Matt? What did you pick? Well, I mean, I don't mean in terms of praise or anything, but in terms of what did you find out about the book that was in the book that you didn't know before?
Oh, I think I've watched all of the behind-the-scenes extras that they've given. Like, I remember, and when they did the DVD releases of all the films, they did those big box, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. They did which I have.
Yes. And, they had most of the films had a good behind-the-scenes extra documentary that went with them, which was really nice.
Done by John Cork. They were really excellent.
Yes. So really well done. And I think one of the things that was really nice about the book, and some of the things that I didn't know went along with, some of the behind-the-scenes material you were able to give on each and every one of the films and their production. And honestly, I think the thing I came away with was how from the beginning the films worked to differentiate themselves from the books. That their goal was never to do, just a representation of what Fleming had written. They were always doing, really, in some ways, their own interpretation and take on his character. And you could clearly see that even from the beginning. And I thought, to me, it was just fascinating the way in which they crafted each and every film. And that was the thing I really came away with, I think, that was so fascinating.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a difference between the Ian Fleming Bond and the cinematic Bond. And what the first few movies that they made, it was really an attempt for them to try and discover that cinematic Bond. So they'd, Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli had got the rights, both film and television rights, for James Bond. And they tried with the first movie, they actually did scripts for Thunderball and Dr. No, in order to have two writers write screenplays to those two, from those two books. And what they found was that they preferred to go with Dr. No. There were problems with the rights to Thunderball, they eventually found out. But in those initial treatments, they actually moved further and further away from Bond. And then they brought it back to Bond, to the novel, and then they made slight changes. So in other words, they found that from that and from Russia with Love, and especially with Goldfinger, they understood that what was good about Ian Fleming and the Fleming Bond was the character, but the plots didn't work as cinema. The Russia with Love works as a cinema because it's not an action movie, it's a suspense movie, right? Bond, it's not from the point of view of Bond, and you're not following Bond, you're following Spectre and their attempts to trap Bond. So you're seeing Bond go into a trap. So it's a different construction. In Dr. No, it's more of an action adventure, and it's more, you would see a lot of these type of movies. Cubby Broccoli had made a lot of these type of movies with Warwick films, where they'd go off on some exotic adventure. There would be a loner hero played by Robert Mitchum or Alan Ladd or somebody like that. And they would have an adventure in this exotic location, and then all would be fine. They'd have love interest. And what they did with Goldfinger is that they really defined Bond in a different way. They take the first two movies and they worked out a formula. They worked out the idea that there's got to be two girls, a good girl and a bad girl, one of them has to die. The games with the villain, we'd introduce the villain, there would be a cat and mouse game with the villain, there would be a certain, obviously the DB5, car chase, gadgets, all these things they were building up. And I think with Goldfinger, that's the one where they said, yes, we've got it. It became an enormous success worldwide. especially in America. I remember they were doing one a year, so they were very, very quick. And that time distribution was different. So you wouldn't have a situation as we have now, where you will have day and date worldwide or within a week. At that time, you would have a film being shown in major cities for a limited prestige run, and then it would be rolled out around the country over months. Yeah. So it took a long time for interest in Bond to build. So by the third film, in the third year, it just hit. It was Bond and the Beatles. So it was enormous. It was the British invasion. And I think once they hit that formula, and they continued that, and they found their cinematic Bond, and they worked with that Bond ever since, as you said.
Yeah, I think, it's really fascinating to me because, like you said, and like many franchises, it takes a while to kind of find what is going to be, your formula. Some films take less, some franchises less than others, but with Bond, the first two movies, you can clearly see that, they have ideas of what that's going to be, and then it all comes together as a whole package finally in Goldfinger, like you said, and it creates the worldwide phenomenon that they will always try to, in many ways, be chasing and trying to capture again. And so, and I think it's something to where every film then becomes kind of graded on the Goldfinger curve, and how far or how close you get to that makes sense. But it is interesting, like you mentioned, as they move forward and as the series grows, it's like there are places where you really do grow too far away from Fleming's original thought process about who the character is and the type of character he is. And in many ways, like many franchises too, you have to find a way to kind of reel it back and kind of get more grounded, and that happens, a few times throughout the run of Bond.
Well, I think that the major thing you've got to remember is that we have different actors playing Bond over the years.
Right.
And the actor, the personality of the actor, and the interpretation of the actor, in many ways, defines how that movie or those groups of movies are going to be made, their tone, their attitude, etc. So for example, Sean Connery, the very sardonic asides, etc., which really came from the humour that the director Terence Young had on the first two movies, and his interaction with Sean Connery and his making of Sean Connery. Sean Connery copied many of the mannerisms, the style of Terence Young in order to create his Bond. But that sardonic sense of humour, which they both share, Terence Young allowed to be in the movie. So, okay, he has a good, Connery thinks of a good line, or Terence Young thinks of a good line. Okay, let's just do an extra take and see how it plays. Yeah. So that sort of defines Connery's role, and because it's his attitude to the character and how he interprets it and plays it. Roger Moore is completely different kettle of fish. I mean, this is a guy who was the saint for many years.
Right.
And his idea of comedy is completely different. His is the aside to the audience. Yeah. His is the so he's used that idea of the sardonic aside in order to play it with a different tone, much lightness of touch. is much more suave and sophisticated. And also, if you have a look at Roger Moore, you can imagine Sean Connery sweating and, being in trouble.
Right.
But Roger Moore, no, right? You would never see him sweat or be troubled by something. Yeah. So it was a completely different physical attitude was different as well in the way that he played action. So when I was going through all the archives, etc., I was very happy to find a photo of Roger Moore. He's training. He's doing some of his martial arts for which one was it? It was for Man with the Golden Gun, and he is drenched in sweat doing it because he's training, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, yes, this is a guy who puts an enormous amount of effort into his performance in order to make it look effortless, right? And so, so this was part of his definition of the character, and so even though the formula of some of the stories may remain the same, the interpretations of the characters of the Bond character is different depending on the actor, and that comes down to the producers casting the actor in the role, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I really do as well. Obviously, the reasons that they choose each and every person was always fascinating to me. Having to move away from Connery, the frustrations you end up having with Lazenby, and not because I dislike his film or even like him as Bond, but it's more him personally, and the way that ends up going, which is too bad for him. I mean, he makes all the wrong choices there, and
which he's admitted.
Exactly.
He knows that he messed up or misinterpreted or was took bad advice. Which I think ultimately was the way of the thing. But these things happen in life. We all do it. It's just that it's a little bit more public in his case.
Right. Well, and a much bigger, it's like millions of dollars at stake too decision.
Yeah, but the thing is, he did make a great movie. So he's always got that and still got that. So
absolutely.
So which No Time to Die channels.
Yes.
On the Manchester Secret Service more than any other other movies. So both with its music cues and themes, etc. So no, I don't think his place in history is assured.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think as we look at the rest of the people who played Bond, obviously Timothy in many ways is kind of a reaction and a change to bring the character more down to earth. I think his movies are definitely undersold in their importance for the character. I think he's actually, as I look at his films, to me, he's the proto Craig in many ways, and I just don't know if people were absolutely ready for that at that point.
Well, I think I love those movies, especially License to Kill, which I think is
I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's an exceptionally good movie, and I think that the problem is that if you like, you could see Roger Moore in Your Eyes Only, and there were moments in that where they were verging towards that idea of bringing Bond back to something
absolutely
more realistic and something a bit more serious. But Roger Moore didn't like it. He felt that wasn't his character. It wasn't in him to do that sort of character. So the producers understood that, So when Dalton came along, he had the opportunity. He was slightly younger, more athletic. He was willing to go in and do, actually quite dangerous stunts. The Gibraltar sequence at the beginning of first movie was, Timothy Dalton got on top of the Land Rover and drove at speed around Gibraltar. So the second unit, Arthur Worcester and all those, they were delighted, to have a Bond actor who could get so involved. But I think that it was strange because during that period, there were a lot of action heroes coming around within, in cinema, who were, a bit grittier. I'm thinking of things like Die Hard, and you've got your Arnold and your Sylvester Stallone and all these sort of people, actually making sometimes quite tough movies, and certainly gritty and more violent movies. And I think maybe Bond may not be as different to those if he was going towards them. Perhaps the audience didn't go with him. So, which is a great pity. And then there was a 6-year gap when there was some legal problems behind the scenes, and that really, that became the point at which Barbara Broccoli and Michael D. Wilson really took over a lot of the responsibilities from Barbara Broccoli, from the father, and then and so it created. It was a good time for them to create a new tone and a new direction, and that's where Pierce Brosnan comes in, who, funny enough, is like a mix between Connery and Moore.
Yes.
He falls directly in between. He had that the grittiness and seriousness of Connery, and but at the same time, he had the lightness of touch that Roger Moore had, with the humor. So I thought that was a really excellent choice. And GoldenEye is one of the great movies. I think what's great is that every single Bond actor has at least one really, really great movie.
Yeah, I agree. And Brosnan Brosnan for me is so special, and obviously it's really my kind of first experience with Bond in the way of like the cinema and getting to see it and it kind of becoming my Bond. And of course it helps that the video game was such a huge hit with that generation, and even continues to be a popular thing. But at the same time, I think that movie helps reinvent Bond in the sense for the late 20th century, and help it move into the 21st century. And I think they gave him, like you said, they gave him just enough of, and really played to Brosnan's strengths, which is he has the ability to be cruel and calculating and hard, but at the same time, he also has an underlying like emotional nature to him that is a little bit more like Roger or even Timothy Dalton's Bond. So he was really a nice mixture of all that had come before him. And I think, it's always disappointing to me that, I think his first two movies are very good. And by the time they get to his last two movies, they're just leaning in too much to fantasticalism that it takes away the grounded nature that Bond had really always had, even for all of its, globe-trotting bluster.
Yeah, I think that if you have a look at each of the Bonds, there is this tendency for them to get bigger, with each successive movie. So for instance, Connery's last one on his contract was "You Only Live Twice." So he's going to Japan. He's got little Nellie. He ends up inside a volcano. Where
Right.
they're firing spaceships into space. I mean, it's not very realistic, by any stretch of the imagination. And it was the same with Moore. Spy Who Loved Me was an enormous release. That was his big movie. And then they went bigger with Moonraker, again going
Right.
into space. So, and Brosnan, it was the same. So, and I suppose Craig was the same as well with Spectre. So you've got this thing of them always ending up, in volcanoes for one reason or another. It's the volcano effect, So, I think also there's this is almost like a consumption thing. The idea that if one thing is good, if you have more of it, it's going to be better.
Right.
Yeah. Which it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah. So I think there is a tendency to go that way, thinking that if you pour more money into production, it's going to be better. When sometimes if you just spend a bit more time writing it, it can be, I'm not just talking about Bond here, I'm talking about Simmering.
Yeah, that's in it. You're absolutely right. That's a challenge for, I think, every franchise to come with, and to make sure that you are really thinking well about every story point that you put into a story and how that impacts the character and all of those things. Absolutely. And that's absolutely what they do, as we arrive to Craig. I mean, they, I think, realize some of the mistakes from what they do with Brosnan, and their goal is to not replicate that. And I mean, to really do something that they'd never done. And this is something that I think is really fascinating. In many ways, I've compared, what they do with Craig to what they did with Batman and Nolan, which is to say, there was this kind of loose continuity between all of these characters beforehand, with Bond, as with Batman before. And then somebody comes in and they reinvent the character, but put it in a universe all of its own. And so from start to finish, you get a full arc with that character from beginning to end. And that's really, I think, the thing that they do here with Craig. And so whether you like it or not, he is in and of himself and his Bond completely in a universe all his own, which is really special. And I think it makes it something that is really important for the Bond series, because it's not something that they had ever tried before.
I think that there's something very interesting. I was just reading a friend of mine, and we were talking about comics. And in the 60s, there was often a division between DC and Marvel. Right? And the difference was this: in Marvel comics, right, you always followed the characters, and so the stories were like series that you needed to know. You needed to know what had happened the issue before in order to understand the issue, the story you're reading now. Yeah, so there was continuity, right? Whereas on the DC comics, you could pick up any Batman, any Superman, any Superboy comic, and each story stood on its own. You didn't need to have read, the last 100 issues, yeah, to understand either the character or the story. And I think that the difference is that previous Bonds had been like that, had been like DC, right? And these Daniel Craig ones were like Marvel comics. They had this serial format. And I think that's something that's changed really since Star Wars. When you think of Star Wars, Matrix, Lord of the Rings, this idea of a franchise as being a serial, as well as Dark Knight and Christopher Nolan. So I think that this is the difference. But I was talking to, for this podcast, I talked to Daniel about this, because there is an emotional continuity as well
right.
as a continuity of the character in the story. And he said that it developed organically, and it was more by accident than by an overall design. So they didn't have, other than the ending of Bond, of the last movie, they had no overall plan or idea for these movies. But as each movie progressed, and they thought about the character and the character development, then it happened organically, and it turned into this serial, this idea. So I think that's very interesting. That it's all by accident and not by design.
Yeah, well, and obviously they kind of stumble into that when they immediately and when they decide, they are going to make a direct sequel for the first time.
Sure.
And so
yeah.
Exactly. And of course, famous, all of the issues that go along with that movie because of writer strikes and everything, but they do, it does something for the franchise by putting it on a new trajectory, and doing something that had never been done before, So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Paul, because this is, even unlike Star Wars, because, you, with those books, you had an entire archive for each trilogy. So, you have copious amounts of space for just 3 films in each. And so I wanted to hear from you about the creation of, the Bond archives, where not only do you do every single Eon production, but you also include the original Casino Royale as well as Never Say Never Again. And so giving a comprehensive look at Bond on film. For the most part, we don't cover, the TV Bond that they did and everything. But so how in the world did you figure out, okay, what information do I put into this book and, what information I don't? Because I can't even imagine the amount of information that you're looking through in the Bond archives.
Well, the archives are very large. And I have to say, I was the first person to be allowed to do a book using the archives in this way. So it was a great honour, a great privilege, and a hell of a lot of work.
Yes.
So to give you an idea, the first year, was me going down to the Eon in London, into a bunker not unlike one designed by, it felt like going underground in the James Bond movie designed by Ken Adam, and spending a year looking at photographs, original negs, contact sheets, proofs, every single, over 1 million images, right, just on Bond. Then going over to America, we see look at the MGM archives. Because originally Bond was done with Eon and United Artists, and then United Artists were bought by MGM. So MGM had those assets when United Artists was there. and also going through original contracts at Danjak, which is in Los Angeles, and then going to a warehouse in a secret location I cannot reveal, somewhere in the UK, where they have props, scripts, production documentation, all sorts of stuff that's like an Aladdin's cave. It's like Q. You would imagine it was a bit like Q's lab, you know, and that was amazing. And essentially, I got to have a look. I had complete access, and they were so lovely. Meg Simmons, who looks after the archive, and Jenny McMurray gave me access to everything. You know, opened all the doors.
Yes, yeah,
you know,
that's awesome.
You know, and then Barbara and Michael, you know, for them to, you know, just trust me to do this, give me access to material, and trusting that I wouldn't betray that trust, you know, because obviously if I'm dealing with all of this material, there is sensitive information, and, you know, they have to trust that I'm not going to reveal secrets, you know, what's coming out in the next Bond movie and stuff like that.
Right.
So obviously I sign all the documents, NDA. But really, it's about digging in and looking at everything and saying, well, what's cool, what's interesting, and then trying to string that together into a story. So the very first day I'm in the production archives, there was one drawer for Dr. No in the file cabinet, and they have tons of all these cables between Jamaica and London, and Jamaica and New York, for United Artists, David Picker, United Artists, while they're filming, going back and forth, having discussions. The film that they're actually filming, they're actually taking in Jamaica, is sealed. It's put on a plane to go back to America, and then from America to the UK, where it's developed in the UK, seen by the editor, Peter Hunt, who would later direct Animation the Secret Service. And then he would report on how it looks, whether it's any good or not, or whether it's usable.
That's so crazy.
And then he would send those cables back to Terence Young and everybody else back in Jamaica. And then if there was a problem, they then sent some of those dailies back to Jamaica for them to sort out, to have a look in a local cinema. You know, because the developing, they couldn't develop it and do all that sort of stuff. There weren't the facilities in Jamaica to do that. So, so this was like, and you're following this process. You're seeing this, and then you've got, I mean, famously, literally the very first document I picked out, right, when I opened it up, was from Cubby Broccoli, who David Picker and United Artists in New York, saying, could you get somebody to go down to Saks Fifth Avenue and pick up a couple of white bikinis to send us down to Jamaica? All right, and we all know what happened to that bikini, to those bikinis.
Right.
You know? So, but this is the sort of stuff that you find. Now, I say, right, I think that's an interesting thing, right? Literally, right? And my editing process is to say, oh, I think this is cool. This should go in the book, right? Because I think it's a story that people would like to hear. And then it's a matter of trying to join all these bits and pieces of information that I have in order to find out, you know, what the overall story is.
Right.
So it's ordered chronologically, so that you tell the story as the people experiencing it are are experiencing it. So, it's day one this happens, day two this happens, day three this happens. And then the people who are actually there, not commentators, not critics, nobody else, it's a completely historical retelling of the events that happened, with the people who were there saying what they did and how they felt, and and just following it that way. So I want you to feel as you're reading it as though you're there. It's in the present tense, as films are in the present tense. Yeah. So and you never know what's going to happen next, or what the problem is. A problem will arise. How are they going to solve it? Yeah. So this is what I was always looking for going through. Now, unfortunately, as quick and detailed as I am doing all the research, we did have a deadline. So I then called upon a lot of people I'd worked with before in order to help process this information and to write up a lot of different chapters. So this is why you've got Alan Cheshire and Jenny Russell, Colin O'Dowd, Michel Leblanc, and others writing some of the chapters in there as well. So I had a lot of fun. 1 year doing all the photography, 1 year looking through all the production documents. But then when it came to the deadline, I had basically had another year in order to bring that all together, in order to do the layouts and the text and to finish the book. So that's how it happens. And in the end, the story I thought that was most important was the story of family. Even though Bond himself is a lone wolf operator, seemingly, he's out in the field trying to find out what's going on. He has a team of people, Hugh Moneypenny, Felix Leiter, trying to help him achieve his aims as well, and to back him up. And I thought it was quite interesting that here we have a family, Harry Saltzman, Cooper Broccoli, and then the Broccoli family continued. And then I began to notice that a lot of the people making the movies were all family. Suddenly you've got there's Corbould and his family, Peter Lamont, Neil Lamont. Suddenly I noticed that there were all these other families involved in the actual production of the movies. And the same people in the productions continue over periods of time. So you've got Arthur Worcester as second unit, you've got Peter Hunt as an editor moving to director, John Glenn as an editor moving to director, second unit, etc. And so I thought that idea of family was really was the glue of the book. And that's really why I wanted all of these contributors to the franchise to have their voice. And that's why it was an all big oral history with over 150 people talking.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I think it works so well because it was really interesting to be able to see that continuing thread throughout each of the iterations of Bond with the different actors, is that many of the people behind the scenes are the same, and that, like you said, it does create this family aspect. And, it started with two men and their families, Saltzman and Broccoli in the first place, and so I think that makes this a really special franchise because in many ways it has been under, very consistent management in the sense of the people involved. And I think, again, that's something that that hasn't happened in filmmaking ever, honestly, because, I mean, you know, you even look at some of the other major franchises, like you mentioned Star Wars, obviously, you know, that's no...
George Lucas.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is a really special thing, and so I really appreciate the look behind the scenes with that. I think is really cool, and so I did want to ask you, because, you know, obviously you cover all of the Eon productions, but you decided to cover Casino Royale and Never Say Never Again, and so I was interested to see them be in the book. What made you choose to go ahead and put these two iterations of Bond in there?
Well, I thought that, they are Bond movies. One of them has Sean Connery in, Never Say Never Again, which I thought was interesting. And so I wanted to try and find a way of including them. As it happened, the rights situation had changed, and so they all fell under the same banner. So with United Artists, with MGM owning up, so I just so when I asked, they said yeah. It was as simple as that. There was no problem. So, but I thought that they should all be in there. And if you don't ask, you know, they don't have an opportunity to say yes. So that's what happened. In fact, it was quite nice. I had a nice. There were certain diversions. You know, when you do research, sometimes you can go up down a rabbit hole into other areas that you didn't expect to go. And for the original 1960s version of Casino Royale, I ended up getting in contact with Sam Shaw's family. And I had a really nice trip to, when I was doing other research in America, I went to New York, met the family. They took me out to the family home, his daughters. I had a lovely day with the daughter, and then started going through all of Sam Shaw's and Larry Shaw's photography on the movie, which was great. So the act of doing it, you know, you get to doing these books means that you meet quite a lot of interesting people. Also on that trip, I was staying in New York, and I suddenly found out that Joe Karoff lived like 3 blocks from the place I was staying. I just called him up one morning, and I said, could I come see you and say hello? Joe Karoff is the guy who came up with the 007 logo, with the 7 being the gun. Yeah? So I just went along one morning and went along to say hello, and he gave me a few minutes of an interview so that I could include him as a voice in the book. You know, and he's a great designer. You know, he's great. Yeah. So and when you're doing these books, you never know who you're going to be in contact with, because most of the interviews were archival interviews, and then from often like when John Cork did his DVD extras, he would do very extensive interviews, and very little of them, very few words, are actually in the extras. Yeah. So you could have a 2 or 3 hour interview with Ken Adam, and but like 3 minutes or 5 minutes is actually in on the DVD. So I had complete access to all of that material. But what was nice is that I was actually able, on Skyfall, on Spectre, and on No Time to Die, I could actually go on set. I could actually meet the heads of departments and directors, writers, producers, all along, and do interviews with them, especially interviews for the book, and include those quotes in in the book. So, because obviously the difference is for a movie like Goldfinger or Goldeneye, or The Man with the Golden Gun, if you're going to go full gold, we already know those movies. We know how they came out. We know that they were successful. We know what are the high points of the movies, what are the things that you remember. But when you're on a movie that hasn't come out yet, and it hasn't even been edited, and it's still filming, it's still being written or rewritten, you have no idea which moments are going to connect with people. You have no idea about the tone or how it's going to turn out, or if it's even going to be successful. And so it was a very interesting experience to meet each of these people and to interview them and to get a real snapshot of what they're doing and their approach to their work. So that was those were great experiences as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't imagine how neat it would be, to be able to be in the thick of, watching, one of the films get made, and get to have that experience. And so I do have to ask, obviously getting that opportunity to be on those 3 films sets and, getting to see the script and everything, how did that change your perception of, Bond and the process of story making for Bond and even just your experience of those films?
Oh, it's awful. It's awful. It's awful watching the movies when you know everything about it beforehand. Right. So it's not just that you know the plot, but you know the image, because I've seen when I'm on set, or sometimes not on set, but just sometimes I wouldn't go on set, but I'd be in the studio and I'd spend all day just looking at photography that had come off the set. So I would see thousands of images, and then perhaps go to, when I'm visiting Pinewood, I'd go perhaps read an update of the script, perhaps see all these images, and then if anybody was available to be interviewed, then go off and interview them. Yeah, at a moment's notice. So, so you just take what you can while you're there. So there would be a lot of instances where that would happen, and you wouldn't. I wouldn't actually go on set. Yeah. Or perhaps I'd go on the back lot and see them prepping. So there was lots of different experiences like that. But I knew what every single shot in the movie would look like, because I've seen all the photography. And I've seen the production design, I've seen storyboards, even when I interviewed the editors, I would see what they were editing. I would see bits and pieces. Right? And so it's very difficult to disassociate from the movie when you go to see it. And normally it takes a few years to forget the movie and to come back to it in order to see the movie again with fresh eyes. So I think so it is difficult, and I completely understand why people who are in movies find it difficult to watch themselves on screen, because they have their reaction to the movie is based on their personal experience of that particular day, etc., which is completely disassociated from the story of the movie. Yeah. So so it does affect it. So I have to wait years before I can go back and look at a movie.
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that would be, especially, being a fan of it. I mean, in some ways, it makes sense, when you were doing Star Wars Archives, and George talks about that idea of he's talked about this many times where he didn't really experience Star Wars like a normal person. He never got that chance because it was always in his head, and then he was always working on the film or the story or the TV show, and so you never get that opportunity to see it through the eyes of a fan in the same way, and unless it's getting to experience that vicariously through somebody and even that's not quite the same. So yeah, I can only imagine,
especially if you've got hypercritical friends.
Yes.
But I remember on Star Wars, for example, I remember Richard Chew, I think it was, one of the editors, when there was a rough cut of the first Star Wars movie, and him being, because he had Richard Chew, Paul Hirsch had not been part of the original. They'd been hired as editors after the film had finished shooting. Yeah. So in other words, they were only seeing the material for the first time, and so they had no associations with the production at all. And when it was when the first rough cut was put together, Richard Chew sort of said that he was like buzzing because he knew straight away that this was going to be, he did work, but this was going to be a great movie. This was something he'd never seen before. He was super excited. So, and I think it's the same for a lot of filmmakers. It's very difficult for filmmakers to feel the same vibe as others, because the intent and the visuals and the storytelling inside their head may be different or compromised by the realities of actually shooting a movie. I think very particularly for George Lucas, that was the case. I thought it was very interesting on No Time to Die, for example, that there was such a really good vibe on the set in terms of people were very, very excited, and they felt that something was being something special was being done. I felt very much that way. And also what happens is when you're filming these, when the production people are shooting a movie, etc., they're very, very long production, very long period of time, not much sleep, under immense pressure for months, sometimes years on end. This takes a great toll, a great psychological toll. And people are, sometimes they need a bit of cheering up when you're, in order to keep them going. Some people have that naturally, but really it's a very, very tough grind. Despite the apparent glamour of doing these big productions, when you're actually there, you see, it is hard physical graft to do these productions, and there's a lot of perseverance and a lot of hard-headedness and stubbornness in order to get them done. In order to get them done on time, on budget, and to the quality that they want. And that's what the producers are great at doing. I think that the producers, they know exactly, they've had all the experience. And I always remember there was one point where every day there's some sort of crisis. And I remember I was interviewing Barbara and Michael at the time. And, it was slightly delayed because they had to deal with something. And then I remember Michael just like shrugging his shoulders and saying, well, yeah, it's a crisis, but it's not as bad as, and then he would quote previous crises on previous Bond movies. If you think this is bad, then you should have seen us on, XX so-and-so movie. So yeah, these are really, really experienced producers, and they know how to deal with the crisis, to get through and to do it in a very nice way. I remember there was which set was, I think it was on Skyfall, and they had people, they'd hired people to, I think there was a problem with catering, right? And Barbara was very unhappy, and she said, "We need better food," right? And then made sure that everybody got better food. And then she made sure that everybody, that there was somebody around that could do massage, so that everybody had to have a massage in order to relax them. It was all this sort of stuff where, these are real, to try to make it, a tough situation as nice as possible. So I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Well, you had asked me at the beginning, something that I learned, and I was wondering, you mentioned one of the things that you kind of found was the idea of family, throughout the productions. And was there anything else that you feel like in your research that really stood out to you about, the character of James Bond, the productions, the actors involved? What were some of the big takeaways that you came away with after your research?
Oh gosh. Well, I think how hard it is, as I was saying. And that they're personable. These are not, the style is not draconian. The style is personable. So and it all comes from the top, it comes from the producers. What they're saying to their people, can you do that? We need this. How can you do this in a creative way, but still do it on budget? I always remember, so it's a problem solving. So I remember that they wanted to film the tank chase in St. Petersburg for GoldenEye. And they'd got permissions, and then they started filming, and they filmed some of it in St. Petersburg, but they realized that they couldn't do a lot of the things they wanted to do. So the producers turned around and said, okay, let's build it on the back lot, Leavesden, and we'll shoot it in Leavesden. And they did it, because they needed to save money as well. Right? It was much cheaper to build St. Petersburg on the back lot, and put a tank through it and destroy lots of buildings and vehicles and cameras, because they ran over a camera at one stage. And so it's this aspect of problem solving and creative solutions that I think was very good. There was another time Chris Colbold, he'd set up all the equipment to go out to Vietnam in order to put it on a ship, all the equipment to go out in order to shoot. I think, was it Tomorrow Never Dies? Anyway, and said, okay, it's on the ship, it's going out, it's all in containers, they've got all these motorbikes and everything. And then they found out, no, we don't have permission for Vietnam anymore. We've got to find another location in the area. And so they ended up rerouting, getting permission for Thailand, and then rerouting the ship, mid-sea, mid-ocean, in order to go to Thailand. So it's always about this aspect of, I think is very interesting, the fact that these people are not just creative, but they're practical, and they get the job done. And I find that fascinating. And it was always those stories of people thinking on their feet. There was another one where they were filming in Meteora, where they were up in Greece, and they had these giant, monks who didn't want to cooperate. So they,
yes.
Basically they thought they had permission. Again, it was another idea where they thought they'd had permission to film, and then the monks say, "Well, we didn't give permission," and so they started to put up banners and try and interfere. So they were on the top of this giant sort of rock formation, Meteora, and so the Bond production set up on the next door, and built a set that covered and masked the one next door, the monastery next door, so that they could film. So it was, I mean, these are crazy, crazy things to do, but they get the films finished and completed. And I think this is the thing that I saw on No Time to Die as well, in that it was very clear that they were doing everything that they could, that they would have these meetings in night where the producers, Barbara Michael and Greg Wilson, Daniel Craig, and the director, they would meet at night in the, after filming, after they've gone through all the sets in order to check the lighting and setups for the next day, right? But they're late at night, hammering out, complaining about the script to each other, and to try and find better ways to deal with the script in order to improve it. They're not people who are happy with what they have. They're always seeking to improve on what they've done. If it means, oh God, that was great, that was a great shot, but there's a better way of doing this, right? Okay, what's the better idea? Do we all agree? Do we have the budget for it? Let's make the budget for it. So I think that this is a very collaborative experience. And it's only collaborative because the producers give everybody the freedom to be collaborative. And that goes all the way down through the production. I mean, I was talking to various people, heads of departments, etc., and then some of the art directors and other people on the set. And they all wanted to add their own bit to the movie. We were looking through your James Bond Archives book, Paul, and there was this great picture of so-and-so in the background. We wanted to include that in the background. So I've drawn this in, and we've put it in. Everybody was a fan. Everybody was trying to add their own bit to the movie in order to improve it, make it more interesting, and to give value for money for the viewer.
I was thinking of one, last question, and having spent so much time with Bond and this character, and the people who have been responsible for bringing him to us for so many years now. Why do you think Bond has lasted so long?
Well, there are two reasons for that. First of all, he's this really horrible guy, right? But he has this, he goes, basically his job is to go around killing people. Let's face it, that's what he has to do. Right? But he has this veneer of, bow tie, tuxedo, only the best things, because he knows that, he's licensed to kill, he's he's basically in a war at all times. He is a soldier. And so he could die at any moment. So he's got to enjoy every moment of his life. I mean, this is what Fleming understood about the character, and he brought to the character, which is also from his own experience and his own ideas. And that's very important. It's very important to know that every single moment, Bond knows that it could be his last. So I think, he has to do these horrible things. He's trained himself to do these horrible things. And he's, I think what's really interesting about Daniel Craig's iteration is that you see from the beginning this idea that he falls in love, right? And as soon as he can't trust Espelin, right, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And once that he's betrayed, he realizes that he cannot trust anybody else. That this is part of his learning process to be an 007. He cannot trust, so he cannot love. So he cannot have a family. He cannot have a life like others. Right? And then, through the other movies, he sees that character himself reflected in others. So in Quantum of Solace, he meets Camille, who's basically out for revenge because she was betrayed. And he sees what he will become if he carries on looking for revenge. Right? So it's about him, Quantum of Solace is definitely, I think, a good movie, but I think that it's misunderstood because the movie can only exist with Casino Royale. So the thing is that if you think of the character and the story as one, then it works, right? Yes. Because then you understand what the character is going through. Right? So, and then it becomes a matter of him basically carrying out his orders without fear. Mm-hmm. When he meets Madeline, right, suddenly he understands that there are other people like him who's had a life, who are as damaged as him.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds a connection with her, right, because she understands him, right? And so the whole idea of trust, right, raises its head again. So obviously in No Time to Die, that trust is, at the beginning of the movie, that trust is destroyed. Right? So again, what almost, so almost this idea of him becoming a normal person, like you and I, is lost to him. So, so in terms of what's attractive about him is that I think that what this series of movies have done, and what Daniel Craig and his characterization have done is they've opened up that idea, which is very John le Carre, if you think about it. This idea of living in a very cold world where you can't trust anybody, and even your private life is compromised, because you start to think of your private life in terms of the Cold War and in terms of enemies. Yeah, you don't think of your private life in terms of love and trust. So, so I think that this is what's really good and what's right and what Daniel Craig and his iteration have got absolutely correct and is spot on. As to, so I think that, and also this idea is that this character is willing to sacrifice himself for higher ideals. He is willing to do horrible things to essentially break the law to kill people on behalf of his government in a foreign land, because he has certain ideas. So this idea of self-sacrifice is also very big, which Daniel Craig has brought, and his stories have brought to the fore. Now, I think that's very interesting, because he brings in, I think, closer to the idea of soldiers, post-traumatic stress disorder, all these modern ideas of what it means to be a killer.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to, obviously at this point, to see where they go next. I mean, the sky's the limit, really, with what they can do. And so, Paul, for you, where can people find you and follow you if they would like to catch up with you and see what projects you've done, and of course what projects you may have coming up in the future?
Sure. Well, I'm usually on Twitter at Kershed, at KERSHED, and also the same on Facebook. So those are really the ways that I let people know what I'm doing, and I tweet daily and tell people all sorts of nonsense. And sometimes they believe me, sometimes they don't.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming on the show. It was, I encourage anybody to pick up this book. It is phenomenal. If they can pick it up, it's pretty heavy. It's true. It is very heavy, but it is absolutely worth it. As a Bond fan, I don't know if there is any better book for a Bond fan to check out and to read. And I'm very glad that they allowed you to do this. And hopefully Bond will continue strong, and so you'll need a new edition in a few years. So
well, as they say, Paul Duncan will return. That's
right. Well, of course, thank you everyone for joining us. You know where you can find me on social media at MattRushing02 all over the place, and all the podcasts you can find me on. You've listened to this show enough. But as always, thank you so much for joining us. And y'all come back now, you hear?